No, if you treated me to lunch, I can't really say anything bad.
Yeah, when they treat you to lunch, you gotta be nice.
Lunch, you have
Somebody's
to be nice.
lunch. He's talking nice about it.
You have to be
He treated
nice.
you to lunch?
But there's always tomorrow.
I didn't get any lunch.
You know why, right? There's enchiladas downstairs.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Did you try any of those enchiladas?
Absolutely.
They were really good.
Yeah, it was great.
Well, he was at your party.
Yeah, well, I had one this morning. I walked up from the hill. I went down there to get the enchilada and talked to him about some stuff. And on the way up, chewing on the enchilada.
Macked it down.
It was good. Good stuff. Thank you for those.
You know what's really good about them is they didn't use like breast meat. They chose like thighs, that whole thing.
I know.
The dark meat is really good.
All right.
Are we on?
We are. We're live.
Oh my gosh! I could have said something untoward.
Oh,
never.
Never.
Not you. No will. And do you think I would let you say something untoward?
Yes, you would.
Yes, I would.
Yes, you
he's
would.
like, wait, he hasn't finished. But we're going to see.
Don't say anything.
Wait, he's not finished. He's on the roll. Let him go. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, since our last show, I know we teased out the end a little bit, talking about a topic that we couldn't get to, but was kind of big for the last week or so.
Tacos?
Not tacos. Oh. You said 8. Why are you still thinking about
food?
Oh, I'm not thinking about food anymore.
Okay.
I'm thinking about how am I going to stay awake. Listening to Ward.
Isn't that
Ward
battle?
staying awake listening to anybody.
Exactly.
He stayed so. Everybody watch.
Everybody watch Ward.
If you see him drooping, dozing off,
no, Ward's
put up comments.
It's called the neckbone boogie. That's when Ward goes.
See, everyone thinks he's just agreeing, but clearly he's falling asleep during our own show.
Because there's no way I would agree this much with these guys.
It helps. He's less disagreeable when he's sleeping, though. So
that's right. So that's why they have a wrap for lunch, right?
Yeah.
Nap time. Yeah.
Ward's nap time is our talk time.
That's right.
So we teased out a little bit about the letter, sort of the open letter that Beth Moore had written, called "A Letter to My Brothers."
Dr. Muti.
And so I wanted to kind of delve into that a little bit and kind of get from the start, because I don't know how long, maybe the whole time, I don't know, we'll see how we do with it, no plans on it. And just read some portions of this, though, and get your thoughts. So are you guys familiar with what she wrote or what the context was for that?
Yes, I am. My wife and I read that. She read it. She let me know about it.
She read,
my wife and I, we chatted about that as well.
Yeah.
And we have some
so she
things to say.
So she wrote a letter, just to set the stage a little bit, on her blog, dealing with some of the, I guess what prejudices you could say, or the things that she's faced being a woman in a very conservative environment amongst the Southern Baptist circles, and who's a teacher of the Bible, who has Bible studies. She's got a pretty strong ministry for women that she's been happy to do because that's been her calling. But she's kind of finally spoken up, I guess, in her mind about some stuff she thought she'd never really go public with until maybe her deathbed. But for basic fear of reprisals on this. And so she just wrote this open letter to those who in ministry and pastors and others who have kind of maybe approached her with less than grace over time. And I think I wanted to give our take on it. I had my own take on this. I'll be curious how it matches with yours. I know, Leroy, you've talked a little bit with your wife, right?
Sure.
Yeah, I know you guys thought you might come up with this. So, so after giving a little bit of background, here's what she says from Beth Moore's blog. She, gives her where she grew up. She says, being a woman called to leadership within and simultaneously beyond these walls of the church of the SBC, that she's talked about, was complicated to say the least. But I worked within the system. After all, I had no personal aspirations to preach, nor was it my aim to teach men. If men showed up to my class, I did not throw them out. I taught, but my unwavering passion was to teach and to preach and to serve women. So that's where she sets her stage for what her vision was, and any thoughts initially, even just about her sense of calling there, or what she kind of. It seems like there's some hesitancy in what she's writing there of this is my calling, but it seems like there's some natural constraints that she was willing to live with. I don't know. I don't know.
Understandable.
I take it at face value, but
I see that. I mean, I know a couple guys, for instance, this plays kind of into it, and one guy in particular, but a couple of guys that are definitely not pro women teaching and very much studying, such that men shouldn't learn from women almost at all, to the point that if a woman writes a book, they won't read it because women shouldn't be teaching or having authority over them. Is the extension that they take that to. And so, Nancy Pearcey, doesn't matter how good or how well she writes. So as far as the environment she's talking about, I don't question that. I think absolutely there'd be a problem, and there's some significant problem. Although I have something to add in a little bit.
Okay.
In critique, not to refute her, but to put it in hopefully a broader context.
Yeah, I think there's some of the we did bridge some of that, and I think there's some quotes here that I think
my
there's
wife
some
and I
issues that come up
overall
that are bigger than even
question or issue was the overall context rather than something. We'll get to that shortly, but and it's unfortunate that this stuff goes on. It's unfortunate and should not happen. And I don't question the truth of what she's saying.
Yeah, nor do I. Absolutely.
Nor the quality of her ministry. Praise the Lord. So
it's kind of interesting. I started off when my wife started talking about Beth Moore so many years ago. I just think, that's great for you.
Your wife, who, by the way, has her own ministry with
women's
women,
ministry,
and she's got her own Bible studies, and
sure.
So a Beth Moore type ministry.
Hey, to each your own. And then, there'd be times when we'd be studying, and she'd have a Beth Moore video on, and I'd turn around and listen, and like, hey, that she's pretty good. She really is. She really is a solid Bible teacher. And I mean, I've actually done a study with her through one of her studies with my wife, just to do it, to do something with Margie, because you just have to do stuff with your wife. You just do
have to. Wow,
there's obligatory.
That's a ringing endorsement of doing stuff with your wife.
I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean it honestly. Any
wise husband, good backpedal.
Any wise husband would sacrifice to do things with his wife.
So it's a sacrifice to do things with your wife. Is what I hear you saying.
Some things, yes, it is.
You have to, and it's a sacrifice.
Yes, that's true. Wow. So because I love my wife. So, but we've
ringing endorsement of marriage.
We've done, right? I know. We've done it. We did a study together, and then our kids came to us and said, "Hey, my wife, Lindsay, and my wife and my daughter were going through the study, and they asked us, me and my son-in-law, to sit through another study, and we did it together. And you know what? Again, it was phenomenal. So we did 2 Beth Moore studies. Not anything that I ever aspired to do, but I didn't see anything heretical in her teaching. The videos were all well done, and I was really impressed. And I've always thought that the issues that people had with her in particular, and you'll go further with that, had nothing to do with the quality of her ministry or the quality of her teaching. I think that they were more personal or more stylistic, but never substantive.
Yeah,
I mean, I just
and I
what
think
you mean is, I'm sorry, what you mean is they had substance, they just weren't. The substance wasn't bad. I mean, you're not.
They
saying
weren't theological. I think is what it means.
Yeah,
right?
What I'm saying is the issues that people had with her weren't substantive. They just
the issues.
They just didn't. They were just more based on her style. Theologically, she was solid. I mean, the 2 studies that I think we did, patriarchs, and there was another one through Daniel. Was both really well done. I mean, and impressive. So I just thought that the issues that people had with her had nothing to do with the quality of her teaching, or even her interpretation of the word. I mean, you might have some folks who disagree because they're theologically different, but not because what she was writing was just horrible. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So let's look. So Beth Moore brings up one of the first issues, and I'll read this whole paragraph because I think it's all salient to the conversation about her experience and encounter with, being a teacher in this male dominated or whatever, environment, trying to say, the majority male environment that she was in. She says this: as a woman leader in the conservative evangelical world, I learned early to show constant, pronounced deference, not just proper respect, which I was glad to show to male leaders, and when placed in situations to serve alongside them, to do so apologetically. I issued disclaimers ad nauseum. I wore flats instead of heels where I knew I'd be serving alongside a man of shorter stature, so I wouldn't be taller than he. I've ridden elevators in hotels packed with fellow leaders who were serving at the same event and not even spoken to, and even more awkwardly in the same vehicle where I was never acknowledged. I've been in team meetings where I was either ignored or made fun of, the latter of which I was expected to understand was all in good fun. She says, I'm a laugher. I can take jokes and make jokes. I know good fun when I'm having it, and I also know when I'm being dismissed and ridiculed. She concludes that paragraph, I was the elephant in the room with a skirt on. I've been talked down to by male seminary students and held my tongue when I wanted to say, brother, I was getting up before dawn to pray and to pore over the scripture when you were still in your pull-ups. Some will invariably argue that the disrespect was not over gender, but over my lack of formal education. But that, too, largely goes back to issues of gender. Where was a woman in my generation and denomination to get seminary training to actually teach the scriptures? There's a lot in there, a lot to approach. What do you guys think? What are your big takeaways? What kind of issues?
It's not as direct. I don't want to take away from anything that she felt in those situations, because I think that there's a legitimacy there. I would say it's been my
Your
experience.
wife's watching now, by the way, so just want to warn you.
Well,
so that stuff you're saying earlier, don't say
you
that.
should be watching.
Don't repeat that.
No, but I think in some ways, some ways she's really right. In some way, I think that she's
Beth Moore.
Speaking of Beth Moore, I think that she doesn't understand what it's like to be a man in ministry too. I mean, if you don't have stature among some of these guys, they treat you the same way.
That's the interesting part.
That's the part that you have to kind of
read through some of this.
You have to kind of think through. It's not really sometimes an issue with you, but sometimes it's you don't have the same status as these people. And I'm not suggesting
the
that's
jokes
right.
would be very different. I mean,
Right.
I get that there are parts of this that are very male versus female. And
Right.
I don't dismiss that at
Right.
all.
Right.
And I read this. But I couldn't help but read this and say, I've been in those same situations where I've been dismissed and looked down on. And, even though I have lots of seminary education, it doesn't matter because I don't have the right book sales. And now she certainly sold the books and has the popularity, so there's other factors there.
It's just not all I'm saying is we're not trying to dismiss what she's saying.
Absolutely.
We're just saying that it's just not as clear in every situation as she or everything is conflated in a way that you kind of have to tease out that some of the same experiences that she had, not all of them, but some of them are not really based on her gender. Some of them are just based on because right or wrong status.
Yeah.
I mean, I can honestly say that, having been in similar situations, and then being smart enough not to say anything, because I don't have that status, and I want to be invited back. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you've got to show deference,
right? So there's,
oh my gosh,
there's,
I've been in that situation.
you know what I'm saying? So there's legitimacy with what she says. I'm not taking issue with that whatsoever.
Yeah,
but it's not all as clear. Every situation is as clear cut that she's a woman and therefore she's been treated this way. If you're a man, and this goes back to the scriptures where Paul is saying to women, it's talking about conduct in a worship service. Women that hear that scripture think that Paul is giving new rules for women. I just wonder sometimes do they think that the same rules that Paul's laying out for women, men have been following those rules forever. Men didn't, disrespect or talk over their rabbis. They had to walk with deference and respect to them in the same way.
Yeah, there was a cultural context that might have been the specific issues that didn't necessarily mean men it was okay for them to do that. It was just speaking to that particular group of women.
Yeah.
What do you think, man? I know we talked a little bit about this the other week.
Yeah, I concur here largely on that. Our point, talking to my wife about it, part of the issue is what I don't like about the article overall is it's framed too narrowly, and that it's framed in a male versus female aspect, kind of like you're referring, as if, well, this is what men do to women. This is what men do. Okay.
Especially these ones in power. And I think that there is that
not all of them, as you agree.
Yeah.
But many of them, what they're going to do is they're going to be insecure for whatever reason. They're going to be arrogant, some of them, and so they're going to find a reason, whatever it is, to disparage, dismiss, or otherwise look down on somebody else. They're going to use with women. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying this is the way it is. They're going to say, oh, for women, you're going to use the gender issue. But if it's a guy, they're going to find another issue. In other words, this is the sinful side of heaven. Do we not understand that women do similar things, by the way? And, they can do similar things to men or women do bickering thing. It's sin.
Yeah,
at all levels of leadership.
That's actually an interesting point, though, too, that, it would be interesting to get a woman's take on doing ministry with other women. And if you're a young woman that's like a younger in the ministry area, or you're not as famous as other women, do women who are more popular in that treat other women that way?
I have been around my wife in ministry since 2003, and I can tell you, having spoken to her and having watched it done, it is not dissimilar.
So your wife has had this experience for other women.
If Margie were here...
She's online. She can comment.
Is she really online?
Yeah, she's really...
No, if she were here, Margie, you should comment. And Margie will tell you.
We'll bring her in sometime.
Yeah,
she should have been. She should have
been here.
But that's okay.
Well, I talked to her last week. I thought about it, but I was like, let's get ours. But we'll come up with this again. One of these weeks, one of us won't be here.
She would have never talking about women again.
Yeah.
This is it.
She would have the same experience, but she wouldn't have it to the extent that Beth Moore has had. For example, most of the men that my wife has dealt with are generally senior pastors who love the fact that their women are being edified, and being taken care of. So that she would say that.
But your wife isn't in a position to challenge them.
She's not in a position to challenge them, so she wouldn't have...
So these guys who are insecure, and they wouldn't take her as a threat.
But watch this. And I'm sure that you guys have had similar experiences. If you've ever served under somebody that you're smarter than, if you've ever served...
Which is a lot of places.
But if you've ever served under somebody that you're smarter than, you spend more time trying not to be smart.
Yeah. I was on staff at a church like this where this guy, and I can't tell you how deferential I was to this senior pastor dude. I would always say stuff like privately and allow him to take credit for anything he wanted. I didn't care because I wasn't. It wasn't your deal. It's not your deal. Yeah. But he was so intimidated by me, and I've talked to other guys who've been associate pastors on staff that have this exact same story. So I know it's not just me,
women,
but it's not just women. It's not just me either.
Right.
That they're like, these senior pastor guys, in many cases, they're just so. That's why they don't let guys preach too frequently. Or that's why it's only on the, January 2nd, or whatever. Not just because that's convenient, but they really don't want people.
Corey Marsh is being Corey Marsh. That's why we jumped on Corey Marsh.
He says Joe needs to provide proof that he was smarter than who he served.
Than those who he served.
Well, Corey, if you had a position above me, you'd know that experience. But since you don't, you can't.
But what I'm getting at is...
You will regret watching this show.
But what I'm getting at is there's a conflation that's taking place here. There's a conflation that's taking place here. And this is not to dismiss how she was treated, because I empathized with her. I mean, having read and sympathized. Having read some of the things. We're not dismissing.
No, it's a both and thing.
Right.
It's a both and.
I want to say that because...
right about those things.
I think that's where the missed opportunity goes. But you finish. I want to talk about her missed opportunity.
Yeah, because if you've served under people in ministry, it's been my experience, a lot of these guys get to where they are by hooking and scratching and clawing, and for them, it is the pursuit of power. And then when they finally get in a position of power, they will do whatever it takes to stay there, even if it means. And I don't think that they think about it in the same way that people who are experiencing it think about it.
Because they had it done to them, they just assume it's there.
That's normal. Right.
There's a popular former Seattle pastor who got embarrassed out of his ministry for lots of issues I won't name because I won't give him the credit. But, I looked at there's a spoof on my blog, on the More Than Cake blog, where we do, have the archives of this. So that's the plug, morethancake.org. You can see the archives of this. Shameless plug. But I have a thing, I think the article title is something like, 10 ways or 20 ways to know your leader is a narcissist, something like that.
So,
and I took this.
Search narcissist.
Yeah, search narcissist on the blog. You'll find it.
Good. All right.
And I have a little picture of the mini-me guy from the thing.
Right.
But this guy, I wrote a spoof on his thing, and I don't even link directly to it because I didn't want to give this guy credit for that. But this was a genuine thing, and he had this whole thing. His whole leadership was predicated, hey, in your ministry, find a guy who's a good number 2. And when you find that guy, part of it was, you have to make sure that he has no desire to be the number 1 guy. And as soon as you think he has the desire, and he wrote this clearly, if you think he has any desire, you fire him. He's out.
Wow.
His role, and he was clear, he's like, his role is to serve you. His role is to serve your needs.
Yeah.
And he needs to do that and submit to that role, and he needs to be available 24/7 for anything you need him. He needs to be willing to drop anything and come and serve whatever need you have. And he wrote this, and this was what he actually wrote. I'm not exaggerating. I'm not telling you this is like my turn. This is what he wrote. And this is the guy who would at these conferences have just tons of people. And I was at the conference of his minions, the guys who served and followed after this guy. And, these are guys, some guys at church of like 150 say, hey, can we get together and have some lunch? I want to kind of pick your brain about some things about elders and plurality and what that is. Oh, well, I'm busy. You gotta come to my monthly training thing. Or, oh, my other elders telling me I need to protect my time. I need to guard myself. So you can, go to these special, it's like they were so arrogant with tiny little churches that they knew that there's a approach to giving yourself this aura of power and authority, and you had to go through the layers, and they built in these layers to prove that they were better than anybody else who would want to pursue their role, and that's how they were trained to lead. And so this is part of what I see and what Beth Moore brings up in her issue. Mm-hmm. Certainly guys are willing to use the fact that she's a woman against her.
Mm-hmm. Oh, right.
They'll
use anything. Yeah.
But if they don't have that, they'll find something else.
Find exactly right.
And that's the sad part about all
There are some great leaders out there.
There's a handful.
But there are others that will do stuff like this.
Yeah, and that's the opportunity missed in this. This is true what she says about women and being used. Some guys are just flat out, they don't like women or whatever. Yeah. But there are some people, this is more about a power control issue, which is not biblical leadership.
Or insecure, or
and
both.
Insecurity.
There's a variety of things. And so her missed opportunity is, hey, you know what? This is what I went through. This is the way it is. But guess what? These guys need your prayers too. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to put up with it. This side of heaven, it's sinful. Get used to the fact that there's sinfulness here. How are you as a woman of God going to respond, or a man of God going to respond? And that being the case, don't take it personal. You're serving the Lord, not them. It's part of life.
Right. Yeah.
And she missed that.
That's part of it.
Because she is focused generally on the women's side of it.
But that's for the women. She could, I want to say, rise up and say, hey, women, here, guess what? This is what I went through. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Don't be offended by it.
Or find allies with the people who realize that the solution is not a woman's solution. The solution purely. I mean, there are some elements to get there. The solution is trying to get the church back to biblical leadership.
Absolutely.
That doesn't accept this kind of thing in their, what I think are many times fake leaders. Because a lot of these people don't write what they publish. That they ghostwrite. They're not really genuine, authentic what they are. They're different behind the scenes than what they are in front.
Right.
They have a persona, not a real personality.
Yeah.
They have PR teams and I've went to too many people like this and seen so much of it behind the stage versus reality, but we put up with it in the church.
So our lament isn't just sad, Beth, for you. It is we understand and we agree.
We commiserate
with you.
But
there's a better way to express this.
Yeah, there's a better way. Otherwise, it's a male versus female.
There's a big butt joke there, but I'm not going to bring it up because the topic might be interpreted wrongly in this conversation.
Yes.
What about the seminary thing? What about it? Because she brings this up. She's like, some guys, she's there with a seminary student and be dismissive and say, because you're not educated.
That's just tacky.
But she does bring up the point of where was a woman, especially of her generation, supposed to get an education? I think honestly, part of that applies to this generation as well. I still think that there's a challenge for
Southern
a
California
woman.
Seminary on ground or online. Anyway.
We accept women.
And we take women too.
But it's not whether we'll take, because most places will take their money.
Right.
But the question is, what do they do with that degree when they're done? Because a lot of places, like you talk about, women are accepted in women's ministries. But you look at how many women's ministries where it's the pastor's wife who does it, or somebody who is an untrained or uneducated woman who takes that role because they're willing to do it for free or just out of the church. They're not really given treated the same in terms of respect for those roles as a women's Bible study leader often. Because they don't hire for those things.
And
they
what's
don't
even amazing,
require an education. And they do that because they don't really care in many churches. They'll just, any warm-bodied woman willing to do it.
What's amazing about that is
we don't do that for men.
Their ministries are often twice as large as men's ministries. They're twice as large because generally more women are frequenting the church. And what I think about that is I don't want to say we haven't done a good job. I mean, there hasn't been enough good material thought or written about women in ministry. I think when we've gone through and looked at systematic theologies, for example, and read how or tried to critique how these people saw women in the church, that we saw that they were writing from a particular perspective that wasn't that had presuppositions in it that were kind of inimical or hostile to Scripture in some cases. I think in some cases there just wasn't enough thought or talked about the role of women in churches, and I still think in some ways there's still confusion. There's still a large amount of confusion about the extent or the role of women in the church, and that confusion doesn't necessarily come from the Bible believing side as much as it comes from people who want to take a view that is contra Scripture or more cultural and inject it into Scripture.
Well, and part of that goes back to a culture where I think women in their particular giftedness or strengths aren't really given the opportunities because there's a cultural restriction on some of that. It's not necessarily a biblical restriction on those things. I know my wife is, incredibly gifted. She has more of a pastoral gifting than I do in terms of her ability to disciple and to mentor. When we were church planting in Washington, our average Sunday attendance, I think was maybe like 70, 80 at our highest, when we were doing that for years. And that was at our highest. But she had a women's ministry that she had done, that she did for moms, because that was her phase of life, and she loved it. They had like 100, 120 women or something like that. I mean, she started ministries in 3 different places that are all, well over 100 every time, And so, and that's in small environments and big environments. She's had very successful in doing those things. And yet, to many people, that's dismissed, or that's not seen as, well, that's good as long as she's doing it in the women's thing, or, and there's no crossover into whatever else. And she's never had any desire. I've tried to get her to, like, she wrote a chapter in my book, the last book on the elders, Elders Lead a Healthy Family book.
I don't want to read that chapter.
That's because you're racist. I mean, sexist. Or whatever it is. Whatever. All those S words.
Oh my God.
All the yes.
All the S words. You're all of them. But I've tried to get her to write more and to even speak in other venues and stuff like that. She's just not necessarily, that's just not where she feels when she wants to do it. She's more very relational and pastoral and stuff. But I would love her to have a larger platform to do things. But I know that she would also probably get pushback in those things as well. But I think that's sad that women in their giftedness are not given the opportunities that I think are fine, without violating any Scripture, without violating, the thing that God has taught. We've set up our own barriers and hurdles, the men in leadership have, that I think make it very difficult for women, even if they are seminary trained. Like, even look at Biola. They have women in apologetics. Oh, that's great, but you don't see a lot of women doing the pastoral ones, because who's going to let them preach or teach? Not very many conservative places will. Which does bring up the issue. I don't know if you guys want to delve into it, but what's your thoughts on women preaching in a Sunday environment? No non-controversial topic.
Ward, what do you think, Ward?
I actually don't know if we'd all agree or not on this.
No, we probably don't know. We'd be probably 2-1.
Well, it depends on what you mean by preaching. I'm not trying to cut terms here, but preaching, get up there and speaking for a time, or actually being the lead pastor of a church. I see those as being different. So
It could be.
Okay.
Yeah,
Because you
it could
could
be.
have a guest lecturer, someone come in to present.
But you'd be okay with that if a woman was speaking.
I'm okay with
teaching in a church environment. At least, other.
Well, teaching is different. You
stuff.
said preaching. You said teaching. I guess I distinguish
Well, I'm
right
doing
now.
preaching tests / teaching on a Sunday. Say a typical Sunday environment.
Right.
Whatever, preaching / teaching.
I kind of view the role of teacher as a legitimate role, which we don't have here. It's a legitimate role, which is different than Sunday teaching.
You mean like teaching
Teacher.
in a church or teaching in a seminary?
No, like teacher being a position.
I see. In a church, okay, teacher position.
Teacher position. Yeah, teacher. For instance, you have pastors and teachers, and pastors can teach, but teacher not necessarily being a pastor, but pastors can teach. So we see. I think we equivocate with that term. So if somebody's teaching a Sunday school class, therefore they somehow have an authority like a teacher, and they don't necessarily have that authority. So they're not, they're in a position to teach, but not necessarily a position of authority over a church body like a senior pastor. So I distinguish between, just because someone's teaching, it doesn't make them in the position of a teacher. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think that gets to an issue of where I've always kind of drawn the line is the one of accountability.
Right.
So I think biblical teaching is not just because you're saying the gospel or you're saying something that's true. That doesn't necessarily mean you have authority in that situation.
Right.
Because biblical authority it's a relational accountability situation.
Right.
Or not,
and has a specific position typically.
Yeah, so I'm saying...
And I don't think Sunday school teaching has that position of authority necessarily.
It can.
So,
I guess it depends on how it's structured.
But not you just your random, hey, we need someone to teach this or whatever. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I don't see them as being... Anyway, go ahead.
No. Leroy, what do you think?
Yeah.
Weigh in on this lovely topic. Women,
Ryan.
teaching, preaching.
No, I'm going to be...
You go, Ryan.
Board is right about everything.
Board is right about everything. Yeah. Thanks, Ryan, glad you joined us.
I think there's...
Don't you have work to do? Aren't you supposed to be cutting trees or something?
Yeah. No, he's doing what he's supposed to do. You stay right there.
I think that authority, right? To have authority is one thing. And for men to be under that authority is one thing. It just seems odd to say that women can't teach men, right? Generally.
Right.
Otherwise, mothers could never teach their sons anything.
Yeah.
Ever. Which would be...
what about husbands and wives? Could a husband ever learn anything from a wife?
Of course. Husbands can never learn anything from their wives.
I think Margie is she's still watching? I don't know. If not, let's mark this time.
No.
And I'll send it out
No, men learn from their wives. Smart men learn from their wives all the time.
See, your face is missed and you're cute.
Yeah.
Ryan.
Oh, right. Oh,
yeah.
Joe, you are very cute.
Ryan always has nice things to say about that. He's so affirming.
I know. He is. But to have authority over a church is different. And I'm so glad we're talking about this because there are some women who are receiving, I think, rightful criticism for being the lead pastors over churches, who are attempting to conflate what happened to Beth Moore with rightful criticism, I think, of them being lead pastors over a church.
Right.
I don't think that that's a rule set aside for women in the church. I do think that women can teach in the church. I don't think that they can be lead pastors or have authority over the church. And I think that some of those women are attempting to conflate rightful criticism that they receive, I think, with what Beth Moore is arguing. I don't think that Beth Moore and they are arguing the same thing at all.
Yeah, so, and this is where my take would be different. And I do outline this in my book, the Elders Lead a Healthy Family book, because I deal with the issue of elder plurality, I think being a better reflection of biblical leadership as opposed to the senior pastor model. So I think, from my view, a lot of the fighting is about over issues of power and control that I think are wrongly positioned anyway. I remember years ago when I was in Seattle, there was a conference they were having on this thing, And one of the women who was speaking at this, it would be probably considered a more liberal, progressive conference,
Mm-hmm.
granted. But her premise was, women, we're fighting for our place at the table. We want to share in the power that the men have. And my response was, that's the problem right there. Women, men who have this power are trying to keep the power, and biblical leadership is not about power and control.
Mm-hmm.
And these women who want to be recognized and respected, and rightfully so for what they're gifted to do, but they're fighting for something that's not biblical anyway, that I would prefer the men didn't have, which is power and control, and really situations where they set themselves up to be the sole authority on stuff. And so my solution that I sort of outlined is that, first, going to a plurality shared leadership where there isn't a solo leader anyway. It's a leadership of elders, which I do think the role, and I go through why I'd love to say that I think women could be elders in the church. I just can't see making that biblically.
Right.
I've tried. I would love to get around that, by the way. I say that in my book. Here's 4 reasons that I think, here's 4 arguments for why women could be elders. I would love to be able to say yes to that, because that'd make me a lot more popular. Culturally, I'd be a lot more relevant. I just can't get around it biblically. Mm-hmm. But understanding there's a plurality of leadership, there isn't a solo one person, and there's a shared power thing. Any woman who would preach on a Sunday, or I think even teach in a Sunday school, as long as they were under the authority of the elders, I don't have a problem with that. Because that's what I think the ultimate idea of biblical. They're under accountability to that group of elders in the church. So for me, I don't think I have a problem with women teaching in a Sunday school. I don't think I don't see a biblical problem. That's my case. I don't see a biblical problem with teaching in a Sunday school or preaching, as long as they're under the right authority of the elders. Because ultimately, it's not that woman who has that ultimate sense of authority. It's the elders who do that in that situation.
That's why I asked, were you talking about a senior or main pastor?
And
no,
so,
I have a problem with that.
Yeah,
but
I would
if they come up here one time,
anyway.
then they've been brought in and under
it's very interesting.
So that's what I think it's okay. And maybe I'm wrong.
We've been talking about the power thing. It's very, very interesting what you said. You said that you would rather that the men not have it, and it's very, very interesting. I was perusing Facebook, and this guy.
He's had a lot of big words today.
Well, I went to this one school. They teach you that
word
stuff.
of the day calendar.
I know. But I was perusing Facebook, and I saw this one line out of a book named The Jesus Style by Gail Irwin. And he talked about, and I wish I don't have it at home. I have it in my storage. But he said something to the effect that is really like the total key to all of this power stuff. He says that Jesus says that true power is servanthood. And that is a very interesting statement, because so much of this argument is about power and the pursuit of power and the desire to be in charge and a desire to wield, that power over other people, when the real power, it comes from servanthood. It's something that Timothy Keller talked about when he said that power, that when you serve people and you really endeavor to serve people, people will give you power. And I thought to myself, that's what the real issue is. The real issue is the pursuit of power and wielding power. It really isn't. I don't think it's really based on what the Bible has to say.
Yeah, I don't want women to have the power men have. I don't want the men to have the power that they think they have. I think that's okay. So I got to read you a couple comments here. Oh gosh. So first, Mike said this. He said, "I would yield to anyone who can draw me closer to God by rightly dividing the Word of God. I see no biblical exclusion of anyone who can lead me into a close relationship with God." Thoughts on that statement from you guys?
Well, the leadership distinction there in Scripture is there when we rightly divide the Word of God. So I don't think what we're talking about is excluding someone in a particular role.
But by lead,
but as far as like elder leadership and primary leadership in the church,
by leader,
But that statement,
that is the issue at hand. But we wouldn't want to, like what Mike is saying, at least in part, we wouldn't want to exclude women, like being able to say something.
But it's a very interesting statement, point that's being brought up.
Don't get the leather on that. It's already falling apart.
You mean the pleather? I'm sorry, I was actually fixing it.
That's leather.
Okay, it's pleather. But
Oh my God! Wow.
But-
I'm getting covers for that next week because
Okay,
it's gonna all
but
fall
but
apart.
here's the interesting thing. There's a sympathetic in Mike's statement. I think there's a sympathy, or that Mike wants to forward and to say that we're all equal before the throne of God in that sense, and anyone that can bring me closer to that throne is good. There's a sympathy somewhere that's laden in the statement that's really good. However, when God institutes these roles, He's not doing it because He thinks that A is better than B, that women are somehow less than men or men are dominant and rule over. That's not the reason why. God has specific roles and responsibilities for us to fulfill and to walk in. And it's not our choosing, it's His choosing. And He has a plan through that. And we don't have the right to overturn, no matter how sympathetic we may be, or how much empathy we may have for.
That's an important distinction,
that we may have for those people.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have the right to overturn God's desired plan. We should think through why God has that plan and be in accord with it, rather than to let our sympathies and empathies override what God has chosen.
Absolutely. And one reason why they try and do that, I think, to take that even a step further in a different direction, or a little bit more in one direction here, is they're trying to find their worth, their value in the wrong place.
Right.
Because men trying to find it with power, and women want to find equality with men in the role, the job they do. That devalues them.
Yes.
Now, men can devalue women by mistreating them, but a woman's value and a man's value is not found in the role they have. Otherwise, the bum on the street has less value than someone who serves as, let's say, a doctor
Or the president.
or the president, and that's just wrong. We as Christians, and Christian faith holds that everybody could be a porn star, could be a president. They all have equal value.
That's a heck of a juxtaposition.
It is.
Wow. There's a Trumpian comment.
I'm not.
I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it was pretty clear.
You could be an intern, or you could be a president.
There
Wow.
you go! Recruit Tony. Give him opportunity of using.
I'm not dropping names here. He was dropping something else. Anyway,
somebody's on a roll today. Somebody's awake.
So yeah, you wanted me awake. Well, here I am.
You're much more interesting when you're awake, Wade Crocker. I just want to say that.
So they're all of equal value in God's sight.
Yeah.
And that women need to realize your value is not found in what you do. Men need to realize that too.
That's an important thing. And a lot of my PhD reading right now in prep for my studies.
Look who's dropping.
Look at his
statuses.
No, I do.
I'm not just like falling out of my chair.
His book, his PhD,
what else?
His wife. Wow. Wow. This is the Joe
Can I
Miller
brag on my
hour.
kids a little bit?
I don't see why not.
Well, you're starting yours this fall too, so same thing.
Gosh.
But it's why I want to do it though, because
You want to brag on your kids? Is that
no.
what you're
That's why I want to do this study. That's why I want to do this PhD study thing. For years I've thought, I'll do it, but I never had anything that really drove me to say, well, I want to spend that much of my life researching a topic.
Right.
But this idea of human dignity and human sacredness
That's very
that
close.
you're bringing out here is important.
It's valuable.
Because my eyes are fixated on it right now is where I was going with that, not bragging on it. But why I'm fixated on that is that I've read so many people. We've done away with this idea of inherent sacredness as being valuable because we say Adam and Eve. It doesn't matter if they're created.
I like
or not.
how you worded that.
What's that?
Inherent sacredness.
Oh yeah.
Or
that
a better way is recalcitrant sacredness.
Yeah, actually, that's part of one of the things I'm working on. Is
that's very good. Yeah.
I think we've adopted the cultural idea of human dignity and gotten rid of human sacredness, which is the Christian way of doing it, and I think we've lost the value there. And here's what you see: pay attention. I mean, seriously, everyone, you read this stuff. I have read so much recently from Christian authors, well-respected folks, that talk about the human dignity, quote unquote, that's in Genesis about being in the work that we were called to accomplish, because they've dismissed the idea of created, unique Adam and Eve. So people say what it means to be in the image of God is that God created us to work like He worked, and in doing that work, we fulfill God's dignity in us, and that drives to the very issue that you bring up. When we buy into that, then it becomes our job and our role that gives us our value.
Right.
And so if men keep women from this role, then all of a sudden we're denying somebody's human dignity in that. And that's the opposite of what you're saying right there.
Right.
But that goes back to that creation idea.
Let me bring a little bit of clarity. So for anybody listening, what you're really saying is that people have inherent dignity, and our dignity doesn't come from the jobs that we do, or the specific work that we do.
Right.
Our dignity comes from being made in God's image.
Yes.
Our inherent dignity, value, and worth, not from our accomplishments.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Through whatever giftings we have.
So what title you have, or what degree you have, or whatever.
How do we get so far? How do we get so far off all the time?
I think, my assessment of that is because we actually have dismissed in our age the importance of reading Genesis as God's account of creation for a historic Adam and Eve.
Mm-hmm.
And I think honestly, and I rejected that premise for years. I mean, I've come to this after a lot of years saying, no, that's not as important as one thinks. But after spending several years now reading this, it's driving me back to that as, the people that say that's not as important, they'll still argue for the same thing. Oh, we can still all agree and we can still reject the idea that God made Adam and Eve. And, that doesn't matter. You can believe it's a theistic evolutionary process and we don't have to deny that. But the more I read on that, the more, and I used to think there was some value to that, but the more I read on it and the more I see where that's led us, the more I think that that's wrong.
And it's the birthplace. It's the birthplace of every single dysfunction, disharmony.
It's more than you more than I even
it
thought.
Is. Yeah. It is the root of it all, and you can see how it's outworking in society. I mean, and it's outworking in relationships that we have, and our failure to recognize that has, like you said, brought us to this place where we almost don't recognize ourselves anymore, or where we came from. We're busy. We're busy, and this is something I think that kind of goes back to Beth Moore. My big angst with a lot of pastors today is they think that the church begins and ends with them. They think that it starts with them. Their vision for what the church is, their vision for what the church ought to be, starts and ends with them, and they proclaim this vision for blah blah blah.
Oh yeah, you have to make your own vision.
You have to make your own
God
vision.
God doesn't have a good enough vision.
No.
We
That disconnects us with the larger history of the church itself. It disconnects us for the reason for the church's existence, and it disconnects us with the thing that the church was meant to do away with.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely.
It disconnects us from all of it. And these guys' vision for what the church ought to be, I mean...
Yeah, they think they have to... They look at innovation as this hallmark of great leadership. And it's not. There's nothing we need to innovate on. God has given us everything we need for a purpose and vision for the church.
And you can't...
We should be faithful in that.
And you can't...
Faithfulness is way more important
than innovation. You can't paint this picture of what Christians ought to be without this historical, biblical... view of what man is.
Yeah,
you cannot paint an accurate picture of what people ought to be today. And I don't want to.
No,
boy, I could go on this for a while.
Oh, I know that's a whole.
That's a whole discussion.
But to tie it again, like you said, to the Beth Moore thing, the issues she brings up, and some are gender, sex related. I don't like the word gender, but sex related, male female issues. But most of it, I think, is rectified if we had a right view of our church and our ecclesiology was right, a healthy view of power and leadership, which we do not have. We've adopted the culture on that.
Sure.
And if we had a better view of created image and Genesis and what that was. Those issues undergird all that she's writing about, the problems that she faces. Those systemic issues that she has encountered are genuine, but the solution isn't just, giving women the same roles or giving them the same power, because we're just fighting over the scraps of what God has really intended to give us. So the women think, the solution is more women as senior pastors. No, because if they lead just like the men, they're screwed up anyway, because it's all over power and control. I don't want women doing what men do right now, those who are in leadership in many cases, which is using it to control and manipulate and demean. That's not the solution. which is, I think, what you said earlier, the part that was missed in maybe her article, or where she could have gone with that potentially.
She really
being
could
a little
have.
myopic.
I think she could have really hit one out of the park for the kingdom and to help women.
Mm-hmm.
Really could have, because our culture is so far off on the division between men and women, and it's being it propagates it. I see her propagating. Yeah. I don't think she intends to. Okay?
No.
Please don't.
She's just very focused on.
She doesn't intend to. But I think a side effect of it is that she's inadvertently propagating something we don't want. That is a division between the men and the women versus unity. Saying, "Hey, look, okay, these bad, evil men or whatever. Yeah, they're sinners this side of heaven. It's part of reality, part of life, And
there's a man versus woman scenario, and I don't know how much she's propagating that or not. Well, but I think we can all agree that we've got to be careful not to propagate that, whether it's intentional or not, or degree. I agree with that.
The interesting thing that she brought up, and I don't think you got to it yet, was when the guy looked at her and said, "You don't look half as bad, or you look better than so and so."
Oh, here's the quote. Yeah. So I had this one on. He said, "So about a year ago," Beth Moore writes. And that'll be 2017, because she just wrote this article 2 weeks ago. So in 2017, about a year ago, Beth Moore says, "I had an opportunity to meet a theologian I'd long respected. I'd read virtually every book he'd written. I'd looked so fervently to getting to share a meal with him and talk theology. The instant I met him, he looked at me up and down, smiled approvingly, and said, 'You are better looking than blank.' He didn't leave it blank. He filled it in with the name of another woman Bible teacher." Wow. Now that's a pretty woman.
She should have said what his name was, because that dude deserves derision.
You know what? She has two.
I would have supported her calling out. We don't name a lot of names on this.
Well, I do,
but we try. I mean,
we try not to.
We try to be healthy about it.
Right. Well, this is why she has no intent. This is proof that she has no intent to cause division.
Right.
But I think she missed a point to hit it out of the park and bring more healing or direction, help women.
Whoever that guy is,
because this
is that's bad.
More closer to the line of misogyny than other stuff. Some of those other issues, we're talking systemic issues.
Years ago, I did a mission trip.
Years ago, you did that?
Years ago,
oh my gosh!
When he was young and strong.
He was young and strong and
bold. A mission trip in Africa, and I went there, and I was single, and there was this gal who was single, who was a few miles away. We were in Cameroon, Africa, and we started hiking over to this village. And they said, "Oh, just there's this."
Ward, just so you know, this is on tape now.
There's this British gal, and I said, I'm not interested, whatever. And I got there, and she was known to be on the hunt for a husband. Okay, and when we met, the first thing she said, I'm not kidding you, she goes, "Oh," I go, "Hey, hi, nice to meet you." She says, "Oh, you look better in your picture than in person." Okay, so she's British and very blunt, so saying something like that. To which I responded, "Well, it's nice to meet you. I wish I had your picture instead." Okay, so not to be, but just she's like, oh, she realized what she said. All the Americans are like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe it!" But she was British. It was okay. She was blunt. But anyway, context is important. Not to justify this guy, but it happens between men and women. Although it's usually it's more men than women.
I think that in this particular context,
he's wrong.
I think it's very dismissive. Not to dismiss the value.
If he wants to give her a compliment, just give her a compliment. It's so nice. You were so lovely.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think there's something important to know. Is one, context makes a difference.
Right.
So I say, I probably look better in my pictures than in real life. That's why I use a cartoon me, because nobody wants to look at the picture of me, which I can see. But there's things about. You can give compliments, or "Oh, you look better in life than on TV." That can be something. To compare somebody to somebody else in this context, I think goes beyond that. Right. So there's a healthy way to give a compliment.
There is.
That's one thing we've said.
He totally blew
There's
it.
a context where you can say things like that that might be okay.
Yep.
In this context that she gets out, I think it's way crossing a line towards the end of misogyny, which is like I've seen in a lot of Bible leaders that I was told once when we actually were at and I tell the story in my book, and I'm only saying it because I want to give them a hard time for giving me a hard time for mentioning my book, Elders Lead a Healthy Family. But anyway, I tell the story.
Just get it off the shelf there and show
it's right there.
Oh, yeah, I can go get a copy right here.
Show's over. Listen, where's the off button?
We're almost done, so get a copy of your book today. Where
Please go
on
ahead.
Amazon, where all fine books are sold. But yes, this is the lovely hardback version. I didn't know they made those, by the way, hardback. It's like, what? That's like one from the 1980s. It's like this kind of weird hardback. But
wow.
Anyway, but yeah, we were actually at a thing,
stock.
and my wife had. Leroy wants to see it now.
Oh no, I don't want that thing.
Oh, so my wife and I. Not that much. But I was going to say mean, but I filtered.
No, you're
anyway,
good.
I'll save it for Corey.
Yes.
So we were at this thing for a church planter assessment. I wanted to get connected with this group. And my wife was heavily involved in ministry. We've got kids and stuff. And they literally, this guy told us he'd been in full-time and just came in as an elder for this group of people, big church. He'd literally been in ministry like 30 seconds. He'd been married for like 45 seconds. And I'm not kidding. It's like, I'm talking like a week is his role of elder, and he'd been married for like less than a year. My wife and I at the time had been married for 15 plus years, done ministry together for that long and more. And he's giving us our results of our assessment and says, let me give you some advice about doing ministry together. And blah, blah, blah. And, if you want to have a successful marriage, literally, you need to my wife, you need to step aside from this. Your job is to stay at home, take care of your husband's needs, and he meant both like food and sex. Because there's actually a session in their conference that was led by women for women on how to satisfy your men sexually at home. And this is this leadership conference because that's the role they saw for women. But he said you can hire somebody to do what she does, but she needs to stay home and take care of you, kind of thing. And we left them like, oh my gosh, I've never seen anything so freakishly dismissive and misogynistic in my life. Right. That was so terrible. But crazy wild things we see. But this also is a group.
It's almost comical. It's not, but
it's sad.
Yeah.
But this is the kind of people that like get accepted because they're. They write books or they're famous, but we don't pay attention. Yet we elevate those people. So every church I've ever been at that's used a study from the guy who was the pastor of that church, and we're going to do because he wrote a book with his wife, and then all of a sudden when it was convenient, he carted her out as if she was like his equal, and they're on stage together. And I'm like, I'd go to guys that are leading this, like, look, do you realize who this person is? But their book's real popular right now, and they'll get butts and seats because they use their materials. They will fill seats. So they'll use them despite the fact that they are very defective in their treatment of women or other things. And until we get over that kind of stuff, because we're worried about being in power and filling seats than what people actually teach, we're in trouble.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point that you raise. I'm going to try to think through how I'm going to say this because I do want to say
you have 1 minute and 48 seconds left.
I remember I had a friend who graduated from Bible College, Dallas Theological Seminary, and he immediately trotted out that you haven't graduated from this place, or you don't have this degree, et cetera, et cetera. And then I immediately came back to him and said, "Are you really saying that a person can't understand the Bible unless they have a degree?" In which case he recognized, that isn't what he was saying. That isn't what he was saying. But what he meant was, there's more to be learned, that you can go to a place and get a specific training to understand and grow in, and you'll give you a greater understanding of Scripture than the person who doesn't have that. That's obvious. And so I don't think that we mean that you need to have a degree in order to understand the Bible. I mean, obviously, to have a degree is a benefit in understanding the Bible. There's just no doubt about it. I would say part of the big problem that I see in the church, and this is just from my experience, is that pastors are not creating within their church people a desire to even know more. Many pastors don't want their church people to grow past them.
Yeah. That's it. Keep them under you. And that's for men and women.
Sadly. And the result is we're making people in the church pray for ideas that are heretical, ultimately anti-biblical, and maybe not on the surface, but the long-term effects. We're making people pray because of ego and because of the pursuit of power. And when you find people in error, they
When you're saying prayer right now, you mean P-R-E-Y, don't you?
P-R-E-Y,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, like lion versus the prey sort of thing.
Yeah.
Victims.
And there's no desire.
Dean John, to see you, brother.
Yeah, there's no desire to grow past, your pastor. I think the best thing that you can do for your pastor is to grow past him.
Yeah, well, and I think
because he's done his job.
Pastor should want
he's done his
people
job
to grow that way too.
He's done his job.
We don't.
He said, "Listen, the best football coaches, high school football coaches, want their kids to go off and be great football players in college, and great college coaches want their kids to go off and play in the NFL because ultimately those kids going out and achieving is a credit to their teaching. Yeah. It's a credit to them. Look at what you birthed. Look at what you taught. Look at how the kids that you taught excelled. Pastors don't think that way. They think that if you outstrip them or you go past them or go further than them, that's an indictment on their teaching. When it's absolutely the opposite of that.
And beyond that too, that was a style of leadership that has been taught for many years. Mm-hmm. The phrase being, you can't lead what you can't control. Mm-hmm. As soon as anything gets out of your control, you're no longer the leader. Therefore, you have to squash things and put an end to anything outside of your control, your power to control. And that's been taught at many of our seminaries.
And the outworking is... I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
I was going to bring up a question I was going to ask you, but I decided not to because of time. But what's the difference between influence and control? So
we'll have to. That is actually a great question, and we should dig into this because we're now into this topic of leadership, control, and where we want to go, and it really does deserve more than because we're pretty much done here. Yeah. So we'll give out some closing for us. Maybe mention when we're doing next week, all the kind of where to find us kind of stuff, and I'll get ready to shut us down here.
Well, we're on the More Than Cake website here, /off the cuff. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, morethancake.org /off the cuff.
morethancake.org. And feel free to watch some previous episodes, and we'll be coming up next week. Thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you, brother, for your comments. You got a big amen from Mr. Levy there. Is it Levy or Levi?
Levy.
Levy?
Yes,
okay.
Levy.
All right, Mr. Levy there. And we'll see you guys next week, 2 o'clock, Wednesday, 2 o'clock, Pacific time.